Hello, and welcome to
Distance learning.
Okay, so assignment 4, slideshow. This is perhaps less about assignment 4, more about still life in general. Hello, there's a cat. Not still, but alive. I mean, still alive. There you go. So I'll try, if I trip and fall and there's screaming noises, that's the cat. So we're going to walk through some different ways that people are working with slideshows. I may not have turned off notifications on my phone, so maybe we'll get some text messages while all this is happening, which will be exciting. And by the end, you should know both some new photographers and also a little bit about how still life works. So, still life. So in the beginning, thinking historically, this is a still life from 1628. The only reason I know that is because it says so down there. Traditional things in a still life, right? We have a skull. The skull is our sort of memento mori, this reminder of the mortality, the sort of briefness of existence here on the earthly plane. We also have some other symbolic things, right? We've got writing utensils. We've got, I think maybe this is an oil lamp. I'm not 100% sure. Don't quote me on that. We have a little bit of virtuosity, right? So in this painting of this glass, some of this is also kind of status symbol stuff, right? So if you have this very beautiful glass thing, that's meaning something about who you are, that you can have it. There's also a fragility there. So we have in this early painting both sort of the virtuosic angle, right? Beautiful, detailed, um, like show of technical skill. Also the symbolic aspect, meaning that we have, things like the skull symbolizing other things like the impermanence of life. Here we have one by Clara Peters, Still Life with Cheeses, Artichokes, and Cherries, 1625, so around the same period of time. Again, the virtuosity in the rendering of the materials, the surfaces, the objects, they are, I want to say photorealistic, right? Something along those lines. They're also very carefully composed, right? The stacking of these things here, the virtuosity of the little undulations in that butter from where it's been cut with a serrated knife. All this stuff. Whoops, see, there we go. Text messages coming through. I'll go ahead and turn those guys off. So the virtuosity of the butter up there with the sliced, the sort of serrated knife edges, leaving those marks in there. All that stuff in there. I would tend to give some symbolic weight to this extraordinarily vaginal artichoke that we've got over there with cherries. But, maybe that's just me going back in time to talk about it. So here is a contemporary example. This is not from the 1620s. This is from 2006, something like that, 2008, 2011. I don't remember. Relatively recent tour, certainly compared to several hundred years old. This is Andrzej Mizuski. I'm sorry, I can't remember how to pronounce his name. But he did this whole series that I really, really like that is called The Garden of Eden. And one of the things that's so fascinating about it is that he is so spot on in this kind of art historical reference that he's making to this earlier still life genre, right? If we look at the light, we go back to here, that light, this light, right? It's this like big, soft window light coming in. There's a lot of chiaroscuro, this sort of like dark shadows back there. There's this materiality of the board that you see coming through there in the same way that we have the wooden board under there, ditto there. There are these linens folded in this basket, right? This sort of like metal mortar and pestle apothecary looking thing. So beautiful evocation of the traditional painterly still life genre, but as a photograph, again, lighting, material, styling, all spot on. done as a photograph. And the thing that he's interested in, if we zoom in here, there are those stickers, right? That if you go today to Find Fair or Superfood Town or whatever, and look at your produce, they will have these little stickers on them indicating things like country of origin, um, sort of like a barcode for produce. So he's using this traditional form with this modern subject to create this context of talking about what has changed in the sort of supply chain of globalization, of how we get these various things, right? So something that would have been the height of luxury in 1620, right? Getting a pear in the winter, crazy. We have the expectation we can just run down to the store anytime during the year and get fresh fruit, right? Which is only made possible because of global trade, yada yada yada. Same thing here, right? This sort of the beautiful linens, right? This very classic like way that the lemon is cut up. I don't know why they did that so much in still lifes, but they seem consistently to do that. The glass, the silver platter, like again with the beautiful light, and then we see his stickers on there. So, again, virtuosic, beautifully done, really great composition, right? Again, one of the things that is a highlight, hallmark, perhaps both, of still life photography. I think this is the last one from him, also from the Garden of Eden series, right? Again, we have these sort of things that would have been in a painting an indicator of social status, that here are, historical reference, also a little bit of social status, right? Like it's primarily, it's a first world kind of thing, certainly more developed world, to be able to have access to, walk out the street, snap your fingers, and have like pomegranates show up. But very beautiful. Here we have, dropping back into history again, 1703, Rachel Rush. She is long dead, so is not going to harass me for pronouncing her name wrong. Another genre in the still life, right? So this is very virtuosic, again, right? The way that the paint is made, or the painting is done, the sort of like mark making, the precision, like looking at this thing, it's very lush. It would be very identifiable, right? We could go in and say, okay, this is that flower. Like, okay, that's a blah blah blah, and that's some other thing. There's some poppies, right, which are very fragile flower, right? They bloom and they're gone very quickly. So beautiful, virtuosic, well composed, a little bit of social status in there. 1703. This is Sharon Core, and she is someone who is sort of like Andrzej, looking very precisely at historical precedent and recreating it within a photographic form. So these photographs are, I mean, again, like the lighting is very beautiful. She's actually, in some cases, growing plants to be able to have something which is historically accurate, and then making these images, right? Again, the light, the shadow, the arrangement, the color is fantastic. And this is not, let's say, like, I don't know that there is a meaning behind hers, right? The previous ones with the stickers, there absolutely was. They were very explicitly talking about global trade, um, all that stuff. These ones, I don't know. She may just be out here to make a pretty picture of some pretty flowers, but she did. Yeah. There's another one. If you're interested in this, totally go check out Sharon Core. There's a bunch of additional work out there. And again, lighting, styling, right? Flowers don't last that long. Got to do it quick. Really, really nicely done. Awol Erizku. Screwed up again. Awol Erizku. He is an Ethiopian, born in Ethiopia, grew up in the Bronx, South Bronx, photographer. And this is obviously not like Sharon Core stuff, right? This is not something where it is explicitly borrowing the visual appearance of traditional painted still lives. But, right, what is still there, right? So we have the references to the medium, right? So there is sort of in the way that the other ones were very painterly, right? We have this inclusion of the color card there in the middle. So in making this photograph, he is being self-conscious about its photographic nature, right? Putting in this thing as a nod to, for example, product photography. There is a, oops, there you go, stuff that's in it, right? So working within a sort of Black pop culture language, if you will, right? So we have sort of things that are identifiable as symbolically representing Blackness. And I'm saying that as white guy sort of standing on the sidelines. For him, as someone who is actually African American in the sense that he was born in Africa, the inclusion of this African mask could be said to have a different or more specific meaning. I think that within the broad sort of cultural realm of Black Americans, especially if you go back and look in the 70s, where masks, Egyptian stuff, which we'll see in some of his other photographs, they are sort of specifically Black heritage. There's a idea of like cultural pride in these objects that is culturally specific. And then mixing them in with, right, we got sneakers, we've got cash, right, things that within current American culture would be still located within ideas of Blackness in a hip hop sense. But again, mixing these things up. We've got a basketball hoop back there. That's something that recurs in his work. If you don't know his work, he's really made some amazing stuff. He does photography, yes, but also sculpture, installation work. A lot of it is it's very smart work, right? It's clever in the way that the other two pieces that we were looking at are referencing art history. He's also referencing art history, but he's doing it in a more, to me, interesting and subversive way. He has this great thing with these basketball rims that are set up like a Donald Judd sculpture. So it is it's art historical, but it's contemporary art history. It is in some ways a little bit more kind of insidery in that way. I think it's important to think about if you're making that joke in that way, or that reference, not a joke, but that reference in that way to a Donald Judd sculptor, who's your audience and who's going to get it, right? Why is making that reference important, right? Is it you saying, hey, I know your language out here and all this shit? Is it giving your people who want to buy into it, right, a place that they can latch on and be like, oh, look, we're speaking the same language, this person and me, as like, fancy white art buyer, rich person, right? I don't know the answers to that, but I think it's important to think about. Right, all art, all work has both a person creating it and then a series of audiences for it. And those various audiences may come to it in different ways, may see different things. Also, like the color, right? Like the background, the frame very clearly part of the work. Here's another one, right? We have sort of similarly, we have that the color chart in there. We've got again with the basketball hoop there and that sort of ruddy orange back there. We have again with the, so if I can point at it properly, African sculptural element, right? And again, I'm coming to this from my middle of the road white ass self. Like I have no idea if there is a specific culture, region, et cetera, that makes that mean something in particular, right? Like I don't know if this piece here, that piece there, my knowledge of them is shallow in the same way that, say, like my knowledge of Adidas sneakers would be similarly shallow. So there is a sort of one of the things that happens in the symbolic representation within a still life is that you have a question of, does my audience know what my symbols mean, right? Am I translating all of these things? Do I need to translate them for them? Can they figure it out on their own? Do I care? Do I want it to be sort of a gatekeeping thing that the people who can figure it out, and the rest of them, fuck them? All of these are important questions if you're working in a more symbolic meaning way with a still life, right? Like the artichoke in that painting, right? Like I look at it and it seems to me fairly clear, like sexual symbolism, especially paired with the cherries. Um, Maybe not. Maybe whoever painted that was just like, I like artichokes a lot, right? I don't know. So with symbols, there's always, as there is with language, the difficulty of interpretation and whether you can convey the meaning. But really great, right? Also, just like compositionally is fantastic. The color here with the paint, the hoop, the candles, right? The smoke from the candles. This idea of, again, like traditional symbolism around, death or the um, sort of fragility of life. There's also sort of virtuosity ideas that would have come in with painting of the smoke, um, all that stuff, right? Other symbols that we've got in here, right? We've got Uzi, um, got another handgun over there. We have this continual, these faucets in here, sort of pieces of gold. We have, what do we have in there? Black Fire, right? An anthology of African American writing. So there is a layering of the materials, precision in the choice of what is in the photograph, along with a real skill in doing this layout and composition in the image. All right, I'm talking too much. I'll keep going through here, but you should definitely check them out. Right, there's like a great kind of like high low in some of these. These sort of like we have the plastic flower bag with the actual literal flowers with this like gold rose. Right, there's the basketball back there again. Again, like I mentioned before, like African, Egyptian. Um, you know, Bringing all of these things in that have particular symbolic meanings, many of which are associated historically or contemporaneously, now with blackness, and specifically more or less, right? Like American blackness. Um, I don't know that if you brought, the uh, like sarcophagus thing to someone in Zambia, that they would necessarily associate that with blackness per se, rather than specifically with Egypt, right? Whereas I feel like within America, coming out of the 70s, there is a specific cultural association between um, this sort of style of Egyptian stuff and sort of a Black Pride movement. John Houck. So John Houck's doing something maybe a little bit more on the virtuosic side of things and less on the symbolic meaning of things. He's doing some stuff that I think is really interesting with photography, in that he's making these images, photographing them, and then printing them out, putting them back into a studio, doing more to that print as seen from the camera, photographing it again, and this process can go on and on a little bit. So here we have something that at first glance we're like, okay, there's like a sculpture and then a water bottle sitting on it, and he took a photograph of it. Like, fine, what's the big deal? Why you keep talking about it? And then when you look at it a little bit more, right, the shadow of the water bottle is going off that direction. There is a different shadow coming onto the hand sculpture thing. So we're like, okay, well, so the hand sculpture thing is actually printed on this piece of paper. Can I move my hand along? There we go. That piece of paper right there has been printed out and then put into the scene, and the water bottle is put on top of it. So there's this sort of destabilization of where exactly where the image is located, where if we were the camera, right, if we imagine ourselves standing behind the camera, what it is exactly that we would be able to see, right, and how that differs from this flat, collapsed two-dimensional image that we see here, right? And that confusion, that inability to interpret it, I think is really interesting. One of the things that the still life has traditionally done is sort of, put us in the place of the camera, the viewer, whatever, to see these objects. And John Houck's work does something interesting to me where it leaves me uncertain as to what I could have seen at the time, right? Because if you were standing there, you would immediately be like, okay, well, that's flat, that's three-dimensional, boom, we're done, right? But because the camera renders everything two-dimensional, he very carefully and precisely sets up these ambiguities, which to me destabilize the viewing experience in a way that I find totally fascinating. Your mileage may vary. Again, here, right, we have like a shadow going that way, another shadow going that way. We have some like paint that is on top of an object. This one has a second shadow coming off this direction that seems to imply that, you know, this was being lit that way, which this couldn't have been. There's this paint up here that's going across that piece of paper, which it seems like this was painted on, right? The interior shadow of this is being cast from yet another kind of weird direction. I don't know what's going on. But also the paint over here seems like it's going over the top of the brush that's in the jar, so this must have been flat at some point. I still don't, I mean, I've looked at this picture I don't know how many hundreds of times, and I still don't really know what he would have seen in the studio. Also, right, color is great, composition is great, so he's not, you know, just like one trick pony, like, haha, look at this funny joke, you don't know what it is. He's very, very precisely and carefully setting up the scene to make the image. This one here, right, so there's like tying the shoes, but then some of the laces are actually drawn, painted on over the top, on the top of this picture. Right, there's this like ambiguity where we think he's standing there, but then that's clearly, if we look at the bottom, like that's just a print taped to the studio wall. These hands seem like the same hands that are in the image, but there's like, is that hand over here? Is that in the print, right? Or is that in front of the image in the same way that this hand clearly is, because it's going across the wall and then the print itself. So, you know, really like you get lost in them, staring at them, trying to figure out what's going on. And I feel like that like deep dive into the print is something that is also there. So the line here going across the top of that in a way that obviously is impossible. These kind of conflicting shadows going one way and then another. This line of paint like appearing to follow the surfaces, but it's unclear, right? Like, is this an angle? Is this flat? You know, beautifully to me, confusing. And some more of his stuff.